arbitrarily confront people like, "Why are you getting a banana? That's not cool."
Yeah, it's interesting within my own experience. I can be confrontational. I can be, um, I will stand up for the underdog. Um, but usually that only happens with somebody that I really care about. That's where I'll take that stance with. Whereas, just in general, I'm more of the observer. I'll step back.
Well,
I'll just watch it happen.
I don't think either the ENTP or INTP is a crusader at all. I I feel as
No,
though I am personally anyway, um, a fighter for justice in the moment in any given situation where something bothers me. Like the other night, I was at the Habit. I didn't like the way this lady was talking to the staff behind the counter because it was taking too long for her. But it was crowded and it was taking long for everybody. And she wanted to she wanted someone to yell at, right? And she was.
that's because of your inferior FI. You really don't care about what she feels about.
Ooh, that
You're
lady.
more concerned about how the harmony of the group would be than what her personal emotional feelings are about it.
Well, that's true if Ti wins the other group. It wins the group. Only if Ti wins the group. In that situation, it wasn't even about the group, it was about the individual. It was one individual who was being unpleasant to another individual whose fault it was not that the food was taking a long time. And it wasn't even taking a particularly long time. That's how long it takes at the Habit. It takes longer than fucking
Exactly.
McDonald's, you know? So, anyway,
Yeah,
I,
but when
I'm not a group prioritizer. I reject that. I reject that claim.
well, it's not necessarily a group thing, but it's that scenario of that woman where she's living in her own little world and she's only concerned about her own personal feelings. Whereas from a systematic standpoint, you understand that there are multiple people that make it up, and we all have our feelings. It's not really about a fairness thing. It's well, you just mentioned the word justice. There is, I guess, when the confrontation comes into play, justice is kind of like just teaching a lesson, really. And
Well,
some people
I mean,
may need that lesson.
but see, I don't think the utilitarian impact of justice or the point of justice. I think the point of justice is the internal resonance. You know, you go from internal dissonance to internal resonance because things are resolved. So, like, if for me, usually what I need to feel justice is, or when I do feel injustice, is if I am convinced that somebody else is wrong about something, that I have successfully countered any possible claims to the contrary on their part, and yet they're trying to avoid accepting their wrongness and admitting it. That's injustice. That's unjust, and I must rectify that by hammering at them until they admit that one point that I'm making is right.
Okay, from one point of view, that may seem like that's coming from you, but from another point of view, the whole intent of you doing that is to create some sort of a harmony within the group.
Or potentially to disrupt the group, which is my dominant leading function.
Possibly. Of course, there's always possibilities, infinite.
Or to
So,
resonate with my consistency model in TI. See, I prioritize harmony in the sense that I definitely like a harmonious community in which I can engage with people. But
so you,
I think it's interesting where my values stack up that somehow I don't like being said about me. I don't like the fact that I like to be harmonious, right?
well, that's your third function, though, FE. And you're talking TI as your second function, so those two are a little bit more in balance than your NE and SI would be thematically. So therefore, they would back each other up a little bit. They're buddies.
Do you think SI and NE for us are inversely proportional? Which is to say, to the extent we use one, we are not using the other.
I think it depends on where it's in your stack.
For us,
Like, for
I mean,
example,
I'm sorry, you're not one of us. I forgot you're an INTP. For us,
see, I'm an INTP, so that's my two and three.
you're
So
you're
they do work in tandem for me.
you're us once removed. But when I say us, I mean ENTPs. You know, we're as close as we can
Uh,
get, but you're not quite us.
well, I think for an ENTP, I think there is a removal there. it's there, it's flip sides of the coin, but maybe you're talking more like 80-20 instead of 60-40.
I
You
think
know.
I think it's 8 to 1 for your dominant and your fourth, so that you'll
Mm.
for you you'll use TI 8 times as much as you'll use FE,
Oh, absolutely. And
and
that's why I can seem cold and removed sometimes.
well, it's because those two things, TI and FE, are they're not exclusive, but
Yeah.
when they work in the 1-4 slot, they functionally are.
Mm.
Same with NE
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
SI. So you have to choose
Yeah.
between them. When they're in the 1-4 slot, I have to choose. Okay, now I'm doing SI. That means playtime's over. And I really try hard to find a way to play at SI, and it's like impossible. It's
Right.
really fucking difficult. I can thread everything else into one big thing. Like I'll get paid off on FE, I'll get paid off on NE, I'll get paid off on TI, but SI is just left out in the cold, and but as you can see,
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get that, and it's and I have no idea, but these are my own theories and so forth. But when I'm interacting with other people, like I said before, some people may view me as a little bit more ENTP. Maybe perhaps those priorities of those functions get rearranged a little bit in that interaction. So maybe I might start prioritizing NE in our conversation right now because in all honesty, I'm just going off the fly. I'm not really thinking too much about what I'm saying. In fact, I'm finding it popping into my mind that it actually is starting. I'm not going to say bothers me, but I'm aware of that I'm just talking without really thinking about it, and that's not my normal. Does that make sense?
it makes sense. But you should know that you are perfectly capable of talking on your feet because it's your second
Oh
function.
no, I know that.
This shows why you're INTP rather than ENTP. You see that as a bit of a problem. Like when I'm really
It's
just
not a problem, but I'm aware of it.
no, but when you're really freestyling, it's somehow less solid and definitive and well thought out than when you're not freestyling.
Right. When I'm freestyling, a nickname that I've been given, especially by my wife, is Tangent Tim. So when I'm rolling with my the NE, you never can tell what I'm going to be talking about.
But
Because
see,
everything connects.
here's the thing, and this is I think indicative of ENTP. One of the problems or challenges for us is by far well, I don't know if by far, but what I would call my most successful video in terms of touching all the bases, like
Mm-hmm.
doing everything right, balancing between displaying sort of ENTP brashness and then being self-deprecating about it, and like all the fucking little things you do, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I just felt it that day, and I just freestyled it all out. It is not possible for me to make a video better by planning it more. It'll be worse every time. This is frustrating for ENTPs in performance things. It's why when I was in high school, I did speech and debate. I should have kicked ass at memorized speeches, but I always had this weird disconnected out of body experience with any memorized thing. I only felt comfortable when I was making shit up as I went. So I
Oh,
competed
I get that.
in impromptu, spar, and flow debate. And my partner did all the prep.
Yeah, I take an example from my own life. For a time I was teaching fifth graders it was kind of more or less outdoors type of environmental ed, which is kind of irrelevant. The point is that every class that I did was different because everything was improv. And I had a base of knowledge that I was trying to get across, but every single one, I couldn't prepare for anything. Everything had to be improv because I had to just play off the variables that I had at the time. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'll tell you, people are starkly different regarding that. I have an ISTJ friend who works for me as a substitute teacher sometimes for my debate school, and
So black and white.
he wants 100% fucking detailed lesson plans. He wants to know For now you breathe, now you exhale, now you do this, now you do that. And to the extent that
Very black and white thinking. It has to be this or that.
it's SI, right? He's leading with it.
Yeah.
And so he needs to know what the protocol is. Once he gets it down and gets it familiar, he's going to execute that thing perfectly every time. But, he's got to, that's how he rolls. He wants to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, but he's actually, his secondary function is TE. So TE is very structured. It's very factual.
Yeah, wow.
So, in that case, ISTJs, they actually intrigue me, but they'll irritate me at the same time. So, because they do, they have this FI function down in their list a little bit. So their own personal opinion on things is very important, but it's secondary to those facts. So
Right.
once they develop their own way of doing something, they're just happy as can be. But
Right.
It's based in that factual aspect.
The thing that drives me crazy is the needing even more information to fucking get started on something. Like, I just told you the general gist is sort of what I wanted. Isn't that enough? And they go, well, actually, I need to know this and this area. Okay, fine. You need to know those things. ISTJ will ask their list of things that they think they need to know before they get started is insane. You don't need to know all that shit. You don't need to know any of that shit. Huh?
Look how detached their intuitive function is. It's their fourth function.
Yeah.
So, kind of going off the fly into the realm of possibilities is not a primary function of theirs. It's something difficult to do.
They're as good at it as I am at organizing this shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, and this isn't a dig on anybody, because I think every personality type has function. It's, I believe it was in Kersey's book, actually, that he was talking about task with talent. And I'm a firm believer in that. And that's where I've had, personally, I use myself as examples. It's not that I'm personally obsessed about myself. It's actually quite the opposite. I'm very detached from my own emotions. But, I use myself as examples. But, in the workplace, I've had many jobs over the years just because I just don't really fit into the generalized workplace because it's a very TE sensory environment. I usually end up, I usually end up bringing myself out of that. So, but I don't even remember where I was going with this. See, there you go. I'm starting to talk and forget what I'm talking about.
I know where you were going. You were saying that where I don't remember either. That's okay. Doesn't matter. We're going wherever it is we go. We go wherever. Oh, being tasked with talent. That's what you're talking about. That you feel an obligation to get something accomplished with it because you feel as though you have things that are of value to say or do.
Well, yeah, just me personally. That's another reason. Once I started learning about MBTI is developing that respect of. At first, I didn't. I think everybody that first starts learning about it, they have this bias toward their own type of people. Whether you're, especially intuitives versus sensory people, and I think that's a very rash judgment. Because there isn't one thing isn't better than the other. It really depends upon the situation. Everything has its place.
I agree 100%, and I'm now able to sort of conceptualize a life spent through a different perspective, even though I can't really understand it. But see, if you think of yourself as sort of having to have some sort of big role in the world, then you can't imagine a life where you're really satisfied and focused on keeping your shit really well organized. But I can almost feel it, I can almost feel it now because of studying cognitive functions. Like, that's a totally viable way to live if you think of your life as, if you could imagine you had a million lives in a row to lead, you'd want to try them all for sure.
Yeah.
Including
including living
your whole life keeping your shit organized.
Yeah, well, in all honesty, I wouldn't mind to have organization, but it just doesn't mean that much to me.
Right.
It's not important. It's everything gets messed up anyway, but that's just the way it is.
At the same time, though, you cannot blame most ends, at least our age, for being a little fussy about it. until I learned about the distinction, I didn't quite understand that I was being subjected to just nonstop ontological violence from a censor dominated culture. And I think it was definitely that when we were younger, because it's like
Yeah,
I mean, there was a cultural hostility towards intelligence that no longer exists.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know a term. It's actually cool to be the nerd now. I guess.
I
It's
At least it is not deserving of violence. That,
yeah,
that's an
it's
improvement.
funny though because I could relate to that to a certain extent. But in my youth, I spent so much time observing others to create these coping mechanisms to blend in where people didn't notice so much. But that's I am more of the introverted type, so it's I didn't want to be the center of attention. So I spent a tremendous amount of time learning how not to put myself into that situation. But I don't even know where I was going with that.
Well, I tell you where you're leading me with that is I realize I spent a great number of wasted, poorly directed years internalizing the the notion that it was not okay to want to be the center of attention, and internalizing the notion that you know don't presume to have anything to say that people would be interested in hearing. That's too presumptuous. I mean that I was. This is the message I got for most of my life. It would seem to me, and I think it's a natural response to an ENTP who, especially as a kid, to the extent that I'm too much now, I was even way more too much then. So I don't blame others for trying to shut me down, trying to say this is not the way to be successful in life, Eric, or whatever, is to be all loud and talkative all the time. But
Yeah,
that's why I needed people like me and ENFPs. We need to discover this cognitive function thing fairly young so we can go, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. It now I understand sort of that people are different in different ways, and this is why maybe, and I don't have to just think I just am inadequate in some way because I'm not normal.
right. Right. Well, what is the normal thing? People get it into their mind that there's some sort of a box that everybody needs to fit, excuse me, that needs to fit into. And as from my point of view and my observations, intuitive people live outside the box, whereas sensory people tend to live in a box. And it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just you can't have a perspective, or you can't judge something for being different. And you're talking about people our age. Growing up in the 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s, it's just different. We spoke earlier about the autistic spectrum correlation and so forth. And in the 70s and 80s, people viewed different things different ways. There was different criteria. I wasn't viewed. Today, nowadays, people would look at somebody that perhaps is different, and they would slap a label on them, and now it's okay for them to be different because they're labeled as something. Whereas in the past, when I was growing up, and I'm assuming you're probably close to the same age.
I'm 44. 44.
40,
44.
44. Yeah, I'm 42. So close to. But it's not that I would want to. Even looking back, I wouldn't necessarily want to label, but it would have given me a different understanding of where I come from, instead of just thinking that, I'm. My main thing, I think, especially in my 20s, my biggest beef was that I just wanted people to understand me, and it took a long time. It took me well into my adulthood to let go of that concept, because, through MBTI, I've learned that, I'm not the average person. I'm, there aren't a lot of people like me. But even the ones that are, we all have different variables of how we grew up, our experiences, our environment. So every single person is unique. So that gave me,
What
it
part?
almost
What
let
when
me
you
off the hook.
when you say you wanted people to understand you? What specific? What parts of didn't they? What do you mean by that? Like you wanted them to understand the concepts you were expressing. You wanted them to understand how you felt about things. You wanted them to understand why you behaved how you did. What do you mean by that?
Perhaps all of it. Thinking back realistically, it, kind of giving myself a self-analysis there, it's probably more or less that I wanted to understand myself. And going forward, I had to learn that I'm constantly changing. So, I don't remember, who in reference this is to, but, to talk about you can understand life in reverse looking back, but you have to live life going forward. And, I made reference, in that one comment to the Socratic paradox about Socrates, and the only thing that I know is that I know nothing, which I absolutely love that, by the way, because this is something that when I talk to different people, when I'm trying to kind of maybe, for lack of a better term, give a little advice or some wisdom, I give them a scenario of, think back in your life, think 5 years ago how you thought you understood something, but now you understand it in a totally different way. And then I say, okay, 5 years from now, you're going to think the same way about the way you're thinking right now. So you really don't understand anyway. So to me was a very awakening concept.
You reminded me right there of, it must have been from, I think it was around like October. This is what SI occasionally does for me. This is how it functions. Like, I don't necessarily remember anything, but when you mentioned this topic of the 5 year thing, I remember that I made a video about this topic back in like October or something, because I had heard on a radio program a study that was done on this issue of how people anticipate the relationship between what people say will change and will not change about them within the next certain amount of years, which states they think will change and not change, and which states actually do change and not change, right? So, and it turns out that one of the things that changes the most and that people think will change the least is their taste in foods. Like, if you ask them, they're like, I don't like mayonnaise. Well, do you think you'll like mayonnaise in 5 years? No, I will never like mayonnaise. And then, you go back in 5 years, they like mayonnaise.
Well, that's kind of hitting a sensory topic there.
I understand. I understand you didn't mean it
with me because of my sensory issues.
I understand you didn't mean it quite that literally.
No,
that
I
obviously.
can't help but connect it.
The other thing I connected it with before was my own thoughts about my own creations, which is when I look back at old creations, they are hit and miss. Some of them I like and some of them I don't. Like, in other words, it's still today. But I can see mistakes that I made in the past that I wouldn't make now anyway. So it's like the range that when I make something is somewhere in the great to terrible range, but that whole thing keeps moving up, right? So the terrible keeps getting better and the great gets better. Hopefully, I don't know. I mean, it's different though. Forgetting me. Sometimes, let's just say there's a guy named Bob who makes only something I don't make, like paintings, okay? And he painted throughout his whole life. I would expect it to be like this. He's got success, like successful painting that's scattered throughout his whole life. And then everything, like ideal level of success painting. And then everything that's not quite perfect falls in a grid that goes like this. It's all bunched up down here at the beginning, and then it moves up here like this. But still, really, the full successes are probably not horribly less likely to happen early on than later on. What do you think?
I'm not quite sure I'm following on that. My mind kind of drifted a little bit. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Are you trying to say that throughout a progression of life, you would think your successes will become more greater? Is that what you're trying to say, or?
Well, what I'm saying is this. I think when you start making, like if you're making a given kind of art, say paintings, which I don't do, then at the very beginning, one would expect that your paintings would be worse than as you practice more as you get later on. But my little hypothesis here is that for most people, some of their early stuff, they'll have an occasional outlier that's great, that is unrelated to what they've practiced and learned, that will hit periodically every once in a while throughout their life.
Okay.
Which would say that basically, if you want to achieve in any kind of an art thing, you can achieve almost at the best level with hard work and effort. It's almost everything, but the actual your best achievements won't have anything to do with that, or something like that.
All right. Well, let me just say this. Instead of something that's constantly moving up, I would probably sooner say, using the example of the art, it would be not necessarily a hit or a miss, but instead of like a progression going up, it would be more like a spiral thing where you might be less successful and then more successful, and then it'll actually drop to less and then come back to more or less than more. Everything is constantly changing, so the perspective of what we call successful is constantly changing as well. So therefore,
but if you look at the line over time, it's going to be an upward direction. Mm-hmm. It'll have a jagged parts, sure.
But maybe the spiral just gets bigger. So maybe your successes will become greater, but at that same point of view, when you do fail, the failure might be even greater as well.
No, but see, my point isn't that the successes are greater. My point is that your greatest success when you don't know anything, artistically, is going to be the same level of greatness as when you know a bunch of shit. And that what changes is everything less than your greatest success.
I think it's just all about perspective. Because our perspectives are constantly changing, so the judgments of whether something's success or not.
But that's my point. I've got decades of shit to look at. Most of my old shit I hate, but some of it I don't. But some of it is great, I think, So
let me use an example. I'm a photographer.
Okay.
So, stuff that I did a few years ago that I thought was just awesome, the way that I would view it now, because of my progression within that skill set, I may view totally differently now.
I agree, in general.
And yet, that I may still love.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. That you're the majority of the shit, your vision continues to progress. And if in fact it was a period that you were going through, and that vision right there, then and you say, I don't like that vision anymore, and that means fundamentally it was a wrong path. You tried out and didn't go. It's not like oh, well, it was good then, but now it's bad. I don't buy aesthetic relativism. I just don't buy it.
Well, that's one thing, though. What popped into my mind is the judgment of whether we call something good or bad, perhaps, is our own personal attachment to something. And personal attachment.
I think it's exactly not that. That's the thing. If we're actually talking about aesthetics, that can't be that. That's the one thing it can't be.
Okay.
Because aesthetics, listen, there's an indisputable truth to a melody that makes it eternal. For example, it's an entity. It cannot be messed with or changed. I can change the words and try to sing Jingle Bells differently. You'll still recognize it as Jingle Bells. It is a distinct identity with boundaries, duration. Duration changes, depending on how you sing it, but it has a distinct boundary in terms of, it's like a baseball game has duration. It's got a certain number of outs it's got to have, and then it's over. It may take longer or shorter, but there's only the same number of outs no matter what. That's like a song. Now, when we look at a song as being successful or unsuccessful, we might just say, well, it's a matter of whether your taste or you like it or not or whatever. Blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. It's bullshit. It's obviously bullshit. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to prefer a good song over the sound of jackhammers. And yeah,
I'm just saying, doesn't that kind of greatly depend upon we're making a judgment, whether it's an objective judgment or a subjective judgment? Because objectively, that song is always going to be that song. Those rules are going to be those rules. But once we take a subjective look or perspective of something, that's where the change can take.
We're not talking about a subjective perspective here. We're talking about a time object. A time object is that which has the quality of being able to be objective of objects, but it doesn't persist in space. It requires energy to persist. So like this video will be a time object, right? It only persists it requires action on the part of the perceiver to access it. That's what makes it distinct from a space object. So the problem that we have in our dichotomies is this division between subjective and objective is built on a failure to understand that time objects have object status. They are entities in and of themselves with distinct boundaries. We need to treat them as such.
Okay.
And so if we can legitimately say, no, that rock is bigger than that rock, then we can also legitimately say, no, that song is better than that song. And it's not subjective and says, well, we have differing opinions. One of us is more right than the other one.
I just really can't prescribe to a right or a wrong thing. That really kind of goes against my nature.
Correct goes against your nature? Come on, meritocracy-driven INTP. Bullshit. You're fooling yourself about the meaning of the word if you say that.
Honestly,
You just don't like the confrontationalness of it.
Well, yeah, to a certain point, but I don't know, I just don't necessarily have a strong view one way or the other when it comes to this topic.
Okay,
So
what's a topic you do have a
since
strong
I
view
don't-
on? Give me a topic you have a strong view on.
Oh, geez, you're putting me on the spot, so.
I can't. Yeah, the old app I use, I could pause. I can't pause this one.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. I really don't know.
All right, I'll throw out some topics. You tell me what you have a strong opinion on.
Sure.
Environmental policy and the role of law and legislation, government with the environment. Abortion. Thoughts about human tendency towards requiring monitoring and control, or are we safe to be unmonitored and uncontrolled? Like, liberty versus security. Or whether or not we should have full access to government surveillance of us, or whether we should get rid of that surveillance. Do we want full transparency or no government surveillance? Any of those?
Okay, so you like political aspects of
I just thought I'm looking for topics that I thought would maybe be controversial. If you want personal stuff, I can do that too. You want to talk dating topics?
Well, it's not really. I don't. Let's go something a little bit more MBTI related, since that's kind of
okay. Then, do you know any ISFPs?
ISFP. I do know a few of them. Very artsy type people. Yeah.
I want to say this. If you were to ask one of those friends of yours, how do you think you'll feel about X in 2 years? What do you think their response would be?
It would be a very subjective response. What they would have, high up in their stack is their FI. I'm just going to picture one particular person that I know. She's a very, if you were just to look at her, you would think she would be this free-loving hippie, this gypsy lady. But she has very strong feelings towards certain things, and I think in the moment she would think that she probably would feel the same way about something in the future, but realistically, I think that they could change. But from her point of view, I don't think she would actually be looking at the future because she lives so much in the present moment.
Is she egoless? Is she egoless?
What's that?
Is she egoless? Like not proud, or like, I mean, maybe my experience with it is they don't seem to need any, or really find it particularly gratifying to get like affirmation or praise.
I think that type actually I think the priority would be seeking individuality and their uniqueness.
What do you think about this as a possible way to phrase their priority? Their priority is to figure out a way to make their feelings stay put and be predictive.
Give me one. I was distracted there.
Yeah, I see that.
Can you rephrase your question? My wife walked in.
Okay. The question is, I posit that perhaps their driving force of the ISFP is to figure out a way to make their feelings stay put and to make their feelings be predictive, or a way to actually make them have good judgments about what to do in the future.
with my experience with most ISFPs is they're not. I don't particularly find them too future
They're
oriented,
they're
future
not right.
driven.
They're not at all. That's what my point is. They're completely lost in the
Exactly.
moment. That's their
Yeah.
challenge in life is to figure out a way to make their feelings stay put. They don't even know they're challenging with this question. They can't quite get it that their feelings as their dominant thing, they just aren't useful for them in terms of making like medium to long term judgments. And so they really have this weird relationship with time.
Yeah. Or maybe that's just not their thing. Maybe it's not important for them to worry too much about the future.
I,
Maybe
I
maybe
didn't
their strength is just being in the moment.
I didn't dismiss that possibility at all. In fact, I find when I'm hanging out with one that half the time I feel like I'm the only adult in the room, and half the time I feel like I'm the only child in the room. Right?
Okay.
They have
Yeah.
a certain adult ability to be satisfied that completely eludes me.
Yeah. It's coming from myself, it's really difficult for me to be that much in the moment.
Yeah,
So it's
sorry.
hard for me to understand the perspective.
Just because I make note of a distinction in a certain tone, don't mean it doesn't mean I'm dismissing it. I value totally. I'm especially interested in those qualities, those manifestations of nature that seem alien to me, because I already know my own my own like deeply embedded flaws, or not even necessarily flaws, but sort of biases, like
Mm-hmm.
imbalances. So I'm always interested in seeing others who have stark imbalances in certain areas. And I think that's one where they have a stark imbalance. Not that it's good or bad. It's like
Well, you pick the ISFP, which, when with the cognitive function list, is pretty much opposite of what ours is. So it is an interesting um, type to pick to kind of analyze. Excuse me.
do you think they're very
So
much like they learn the rules? That's how they fit in. Sort of they say I'm good person. I follow the rules.
uh, I don't know. It's I think they're aware of the rules, and that helps them get along. But I don't think that's as important as their own individuality, and they're expressing their individuality of trying to show the world who they authentically are.
And how
Whereas,
do you
whereas you know, okay,
what's the criterion when they know they've done that? Is it words from other people or what or something else?
I don't know. I really can't. I find it very difficult to put myself, put myself in someone else's shoes. I can I can analyze it, but I really can't tell you what it feels like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
I
think.
don't even really know what it feels like to be me from a certain point of view.
Oh, I get you. Uh, I've just had this thought. It must. You guys are lucky, INTPs, to have as your seventh function, SE. What a harmless one to have as your deceiving function. It
Yeah,
plays
but the
almost.
problem with that is that can be a little overwhelming at times with overstimulation.
Oh, okay. So, like, you don't like a
But
lot of like wind and rain and shit blowing in your face, or what?
no, it's just the chaotic nature of certain things. It's you walk into Walmart and there's thousands of people all having a conversation at the same time with the bright lights, this, and this. If I don't focus on something, all that just creates chaos.
I see. Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. The immediate,
That's why I go in
immediate
with a
environment.
list in mind, and I'm looking at my list and I'm doing my things to avoid that stimulus because I don't process it as well.
You know what happens when I get in a place where there's a lot of stimulation? I become
What's that?
quiet. I stop talking. It's weird. Like when I go to Disneyland with the family a while back, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, and I don't have a lot of big crowds and like big things to look at, and little things and big things and
Hmm.
crowds and everything. And I found myself just sort of walking around, and I don't know. It was weird. It wasn't just that; it's happened before too. In really highly stimulating environments, I just become quiet.
No, I get that. It's if I'm out in if I'm out in big groups, Yeah, I'm a very chatty person one-on-one, but if I'm in a group of people, I'm a wallflower. I'm a fly on the wall, observing things until I get that personal interaction with one person. You know, it's
What are you looking for from that observation? Like, what do you say you're looking for one person, or are you looking for to understand the group dynamics? Are you analyzing, or are you observing for some in some other way?
when I'm looking at the whole group,
Yeah.
I would say that I'm analyzing the situations that are in there. It's almost like I'm stepping back from, from a witness point of view where I'm not even there. And if I'm in a party, for example, or a big gathering of people, I'm not engaging whatsoever usually until one person engages with me, and then I kind of latch onto that interpersonal dialogue.
Well, group conversations are a lot harder to manage for any type, I suspect. As soon as you start adding people to a group, the dynamics of that conversation become really complicated. You know,
Yeah,
and I don't
yeah,
think.
that's the thing.
Go ahead.
That's the thing. When it comes to a group, I'm okay in front of a group. Like, for example, if I'm teaching a class about something, but I'm having a one way conversation that way,
Right.
and I can handle a group when I'm having a one way conversation. But if there's multiple, if it's back and forth and there's more than one other person, I have difficulties, and this is where the spectrum stuff comes in. I have difficulties with social cues, when to talk, when not to talk. You know, what's interesting, how do I interact with this? So it's instead of trying to do that, which is actually, if I try to do that, that tends to be overloading because I have to cognitively think too much to
Right.
try to pick up on these cues because these are things that I've learned along the way.
Well,
They're
it,
not
it depends,
natural.
and it depends what type. Yeah, it's interesting to hear, but about the learned along the way. But I was struck by for example, one reason why ENTPs and INTPs have a good time talking to each other usually and get along well and immediately start
Mm-hmm.
having these kind of conversations where there's not really any awkward pauses or anything like that is because
There's no really agenda. It just flows.
there's no agenda, but also because like when you said earlier, you're like you didn't like the topic of conversation, so you said, well, let's shift back to MBTI and that whole progression of things. When you're saying like those sort of social things are lower priority for you, it, most other types would be very much deferring to like, oh well, you should tell me the topic, and then but really you are the type that is able to see, okay, Eric, let you're doing fine, but really you need to go over here a little bit more, and you're right, and ENTPs who have gotten over their attachment to being something that they're not. So when we're younger, we want to be INTPs. We think we're INTPs. We think all this shenanigans is playing off a lot cooler than it is. Anyway, we fucking we're totally down to hear that. I don't find that socially like blunt. I find it refreshingly direct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Well, a lot
that's
of people would perceive directness as bluntness.
right. I think that's why we get along well. Is Effie's high enough in my stack that I'm mostly concerned about the audience and noting that you're right that we should change back to MBTI, and Effie's low enough in your stack that you're mostly concerned about it being right and less about the FE shit, right? So that's why it works. It's a good balance for that aesthetic choice making, I guess.
I do have an ENTP friend, and uh, conversation can go on for hours or days. So I think it is a good match when it comes to conversation, ideas, and things of that nature. Um, but yeah, but I don't know too many of them. I know a couple, and it's
Socionics says that you are in a super ego relationship with your wife. It would say for me with an INFJ, and I have an INFJ friend, best friend who ours is known as a comfort relationship, and apparently what it says is it makes both parties lazy. Like when they hang out together, they want to be lazy. Uh, Whereas I think we are, it's called a mirror. Yeah, I think it's called a mirror relationship between INTP and ENTP, which
Yeah.
basically says we get along super super well, but don't get in a relationship with one because it won't be because. And I agree with this. It wouldn't
I
work.
would agree with that as well.
Wouldn't work.
It, no, it would. I think it would end up being too much chaos.
Well,
Uh,
it ends up being a conflict over chaos and order because I was walking well down that path there for quite some time with a business partner, you know, potentially more kind of a thing that with an INTP. And at the end of the day, what happened is exactly what the socionics page said, which is we ended up going like, wait though, we just did all this stuff, but you seem to be missing the whole point of it, right? And like the whole point of it is so we can play making my castles over here, making little sandcastles. He says no. The whole point of it is that we're supposed to live in that sandcastle. No, that sandcastle is
mhm.
supposed to be washed away as we start a new one right now. Right, that's a big problem.
Mhm.
They don't. INTPs
Yeah,
don't
it's
like constantly blowing shit up. I mean, nobody really does, except for me.
no. I think when it comes to pairing, it's having at least in like some kind of a long-term relationship type thing. It's important to have some differences, complementary differences, and along the same line, still have some similarities where you can connect with, but enough differences that you can kind of play off one another, so it's not the same or it's not just riling one person up or with my ENTP friend, for example, we'll have conversation. We may talk a few times and have these long conversations, and then we don't see each other for months. That's cool. Seeing when we did see each other too often, it actually created conflict within me. I got overstimulated.
Yeah, she got overstimulated. Is what happened too. She said.
I just got to the
She
point
said,
where it was just like,
Eric.
that's enough. I need some time.
These are her exact words. Eric, you suck the air out of every room you walk into.
No, they're great stimulating conversations that we would have. It's just that I don't know. Maybe perhaps I don't like to use the word expectations because that's actually where my most anxiety comes from is when people have certain expectations. But my own expectations within the conversations we had, maybe when it would start veering to a place where I felt it was becoming too unstructured, that would create a conflict.
It's
Does
good
that
to
make
have a
sense?
project. If I don't know if you, I'm assuming you haven't. I assume people haven't watched this, but I have a video that I just put up today about all my videos. Whenever I put them, I assume you haven't. But it's called uh, "Bird Holocaust equals ENTP Paradise," which
No,
is
I haven't seen it.
the key thing to that. The reason we get tired of that shit is because none of it turns into a productive piece of work. If it's part of a project, then you're not just sitting around chatting on the internet with Tim, and then I got to go to work pretty soon, and then
Mhm.
that was fun, nice afternoon. It's not just that, right? I want every moment to be not just one thing. I want it to be as many things as it could be at the same time. They can be lots of things, but not infinite things. So you got to figure out how many things it could be at the same time.
Yeah, it's going through. I can recall. Basically, I try not to do anything if it only serves one purpose. Everything really needs to serve multiple purposes, and not everything, of course, because that's just not feasible. But if something can tick a few boxes, then that feels productive. If
For
it doesn't, it's almost I don't like to use the term, but a waste of time. It might be.
life tip: P sitting down. It leaves both hands available for texting at home, not in a public restroom.
Hmm.
One way that you can multitask in time that would normally be wasted. And if you're a male, as you get older, peeing takes longer and longer. So you have more time to text.
No, I get you. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not going to multitasking versus single focus. That's a big thing with NE versus NI. Something that I've come across anyway. For example, I can multitask. If I'm having a conversation with my wife, we're just having a conversation. I don't sit there and just stare and have the conversation. I'm sitting there and I'm probably playing solitaire or something on my phone or something like that while we're talking, because I need to do multiple things in order to concentrate.
Alice,
Whereas
you're Alice.
she's the other.
You're
What's
this
that?
girl. You're this girl in my class, Alice, who's an INTP, who's a super genius, and who just thinks that she can fucking do everything while doing something on her phone. And she
But that
can't. And the
allows me to
problem is she
focus more.
can. I try to fucking call her on it, and she knows the answer. I'm like, Alice, blah blah blah, and she just says what it is. I'm like, God damn this girl. She's on her phone. I can't really bust her chops if she's actually learning it anyway. You know.
Yeah, well, I can't do anything that's super that takes my thought process. It just needs to be something to almost pull my sensory so I could think.
Right. And
So,
that.
I play the old school solitaire. It's just
Well, that's the key
it's
thing.
just
There are certain tasks that don't require the mental thing. Like I often am doing this shit while I'm talking. I'm just like drawing little doodles and shit, right?
yeah, yeah,
That doesn't require my brain to do anything. So I could totally multitask that way.
exactly,
What you can't
exactly.
do is
That actually
multitask,
allows me to focus better.
and that what you can't do is what gives us both trouble a little bit, which is have conversations with multiple people involved. Then that
Oh
feels like
no,
multitasking on the wrong thing. You can't do it really.
no, because then I would be thinking multiple things. I can't think. I could do something and think, but I can't think in two different ways at the same time.
Right.
If that makes any
Yeah,
sense?
totally. And you can't. I mean,
Uh,
you can't hold.
and that bugs certain people. Like my wife, she's an INFJ, so she's very, when it comes to NI, NI goes out and grabs all the possibilities, brings them into a singularity, and they just want to bring everything into one way of looking at it. So if she's having a conversation with me, she wants eye contact.
Oh,
So when I'm sitting there playing with my phone, it irritates the hell out of her.
does she do visual art? Visual art?
Some, yes.
Is she
Different
auditory at
things
all?
that,
Music?
no, I would say she's probably more uh, visual when it comes to sensory things.
Right. Well, or I'm talking about expressiveness, really. Like on which vector does she express?
She writes.
She writes.
Um, well, she does do some artwork, but not all the time. It's not like an all the time thing, but she really enjoys it when she does do it. But she writes artistically. Yeah, that's what I would say. That
What
would be
kind
her
of is she
outlet
write
with
fiction? Fiction, poetry?
Oh no, she's very much on a self. It would be not. Well, when she was younger, it would be poetry and so forth. But now that she's older, it's more of a nonfiction type of self-discovery type.
Right. This shit. She writes this shit. She writes this kind of stuff.
Not anything in particular, but about her journey. Yeah, most definitely.
So what I'm
Because
curious about,
that's what she.
I'm curious more about your INFJ wife because I have my thoughts about how those things people express visual or auditorily, right? So you're saying
Mhm.
that when she expresses, she likes to write, and she writes in ways that are relevant to. Does she analyze stuff intellectually or more with her feelings?
Oh no, well, nowadays, later in life, it would definitely be an analysis involved in it. But she really integrates the FE and TI really well. So, as a primary, the business that she's in, she actually helps a lot of people. So her primary focus is in creating that harmony within the people that she helps, but she does it with a very analyzing way. So it's pretty interesting.
They're good, aren't they? They're good.
Yeah.
You know, though, if you
they're
really
bottomless pit.
that TI is not as deep as it looks.
Well, on the surface, but
They're faking
this is an
it.
interesting. This is the interesting thing about INFJs that I've found is they are very deep people, but they don't even realize how deep they are themselves.
Yeah.
Once they start digging, they're actually they surprise themselves about their own depth.
It sounds to me like your INFJ is lucky because if they get in a bad relationship, they stay in that bad relationship. It sounds like she's got herself a good relationship, and I'm happy to hear that.
Well, it's taken time to make it that way, but yes, I think so.
That it, I watched So Malicious did a video about INFJ staying in a bad relationship, and I have lots of personal evidence of that. So
Well, I can see that just from the functionality aspect of, with their intuitive aspect with their FE, because that FE is just so strong of trying to create that unity and harmony, and sometimes they'll invest their time in things that are kind of lost causes.
he uses that language too about but I've invested so much time.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah. So
it's interesting.
but they seem very deep as well as being deep because
Oh, they are.
and for me especially, I am a little bit infatuated with dominant intuitives.
Hmm.
Introverted intuitive dominance,
Yeah,
extroverted
the
intuitive dominance.
INTJ and the INFJ.
Extroverted intuitive dominance, I get along really well with ENFPs. Other ENTPs, I can't. It depends. We can have like one good conversation, and then we both go our
Yeah,
separate ways, or
yeah.
or sometimes it gets a little, we get a little competitive. But the reason is that sixth thing, that's the one that's your trusting one. So for me, it's NI. I tend to trust introverted intuitors, dominant people, and I don't know. Well, I know one INFJ, and what's the other one that starts with NI? The first dominant one?
INTJ.
INTJ. Oh yeah, I know an INTJ. So I also trust Mega Bro. I trust the shit out of him too. I'm always going like, well, I bet Mega Bro will know, as I do with Corey.
Yeah,
Oh, Corey will know. Corey knows what's best about and I don't do that with any other types. I am always the person who I assume I know best about everything, except for those fucking two, INFJ and
well,
INTJ.
that's the interesting thing about the NI dominant. They oftentimes, they know things, and a lot of times they don't even know how they know them, but they do know them. It's not as important. The details of how they know it is not important because they are more generalized, and but they trust in that knowing,
Right.
and it's usually right.
Yeah.
It's usually right, and at least as a maturing INFJ has really learned to trust in that intuitive, that introverted intuition, and just completely 100%. This is for my life. This is her primary function, so she completely trusts in it, regardless of whether she rationally understands the reasoning, but she trusts it.
But you need to keep putting new data in front of them because they will get
Oh yeah.
stuck. They will get stuck on what their last intuition was. So if
Oh no, absolutely.
yeah,
But I think that's a good dynamic that we have, is because I'm constantly seeking new knowledge, and we have conversations about this, so it puts these things up, and we work really well together in that. Whereas sometimes with the things that I bring up will expand because she's a contemplator. She'll contemplate on things like, I bring up things, and she'll need a minute to think about it, and then comes up with certain things. That's probably the biggest discourse between us, is when I get into that tangential thinking where I'm just going blah 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 blah, million miles a minute, and she can't keep up with what I'm saying. It's not that she doesn't understand; she just can't keep up. So that's something that I've learned throughout my processing, is
Mega Bro
to be a
describes
little bit.
that. Mega Bro describes that thing you just said as SI not being for the ENTP. The SI is not remotely adequate to keep up with the NE, right? So we just sort of store generalized tags of things. For them,
Mhm.
they are it's a shadow function for them that they utilize. It's in their eighth slot, so it's pretty comfortable. But his point was SI is not equipped to set these things in front of NI at that speed. It's like the
Right.
the SI is basically her SI is taking each of those things and figuring out like, okay, where do I put it, and and then you've already said two more things, and she's like, but I can only put them away one at a time, and if you,
Hmm.
I can't, I only have room to line up like three things total before there's nothing else to fit there.
Right. That was probably one of my biggest lessons that I've had to learn, and it's helped me dramatically, is to slow down when speaking with other people. And a skill that I had to learn was I had to learn how to listen. And that was difficult, but
That's a
it's
tough
something
one.
that is worth developing.
It is, and I'll tell you, I'm not a very good listener still, and I don't remember very often to slow down because both those things require mindfulness, and the ENTP
Yeah.
is fundamentally deprived of mindfulness. However, one thing that helps me to be more mindful is recording my conversations. So you're actually getting the more listening, uh, chill Eric than you would normally get. It also depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to ENFJ or something, I probably will be talking more slowly, probably because the ENFJ will be guiding me towards that in their own
Yeah.
way. And the one thing that all these people who are guiding me are unaware of probably is that I'm aware of exactly what they're doing, and I will respond to it, but I'll respond to the fact that they're attempting to do it, not to whatever it is their methodology is. You know?
Well, I think that's actually an important thing with the MBTI of learning these different things is learning how to interact with different people. And if you can develop an understanding of different types, it's, at least from my point of view, is developing a respect for that. Whereas, to me, FE is very much about compassion. I talk about unity and so forth, but really it's about compassion because to me, compassion isn't about what I want; it's about what is best for the whomever is outside of me. Whether it's the person I'm talking to or the group or whatever. But by learning, having a little compassion, that's allowed me to become a better listener, to slow down a little bit and not get so excited about what's in my mind, because not everybody can follow that. And does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, my experience is that I vacillate back and forth. I've learned lots of stuff, and sometimes my behavior and my manifestations reflect that learning, and sometimes it doesn't. And
Mm-hmm.
and when I feel like I've got anything down, I'm wrong. And and when I feel like I've got a good way, like I think I've identified the best way, I'm guaranteed to not go that way.
Well, that's the Socratic paradox. The only thing that I know is that I know nothing.
Well, see,
We get it in our minds that we know something, but realistically we don't. We're just full of shit.
well, I mean, I know all kinds of things. I don't like Socrates. I don't like the Socratic paradox. I don't like the Socratic method either. I think the Socratic method is completely bullshit. We know all kinds of things. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I just don't know the answers to the questions I want to know most. Right?
Right.
I'll never. The real paradox is this: you always want to know. You'll always want to know the things you don't know, and the things that you
Right.
learn won't ever satisfy you in terms of being quantitatively solvent in their nature. That's the paradox. Satisfaction.
Well,
Where is the satisfaction?
I don't know, but you're in any dumbness, so those endless possibilities of connecting the dots are a never-ending thing for you.
Right.
How
I
are you
wanted to
gonna
make a
ever
picture.
know
I don't want it
anything?
to be never ending. I wanted to make a picture. I wanted the last thoughts come together and go, there, motherfuckers. That's why we all exist.
But before you get to that, you're gonna go off on a tangent.
Well, but the thing is, the tangent has to fit into the big picture. Then that's the point. That's the bird holocaust. If the picture, if the tangent is part of the pictures that the dots that have to connect, then it's all fine. I just have to make sure I live long enough to get the picture done.
I don't think there is no ending. It's always the journey.
I
At
refuse
least
to
for us.
accept that. I want a goddamn satisfactory conclusion to things.
Well, we get all want.
And that's a perfect ending to this video. Quite a satisfactory conclusion. Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People.